the state election?
Well, I have for many years, I'm an experienced teacher, 17 years. I have a Master of Education specialising in leadership and management, and I've written 4 books of non-fiction literature. My experience as a teacher drives me into politics because of the way the politicians, Liberal and Labor politicians, have treated teachers right across Australia. And over many years of my experience and skill and expertise, I have developed what I believe to be a great vision for education for our nation. And I believe I have the best vision for education to fix Australia's education system, not just fix Australia's education system, but create a world-class education system. So I was looking to start in the state parliament. That was my intention, to continue to contest elections till I win a seat in the parliament. And as the opportunity presented itself to contest the federal election by 3 parties, then I was asked and I pursued that for the federal election.
For the federal election, you became a member of the Palmer United Party.
I was endorsed by Mr. Palmer for my expertise in education. Based on my application and also YouTube broadcasting, I've engaged on lots of issues, in particular education.
And what's happened with the Palmer bubble? It's popped.
It's popped. It didn't quite work out because, well, I'm an intelligent person. As a teacher, I'm used to speaking freely and taking a leadership role, and I'm a great promoter of freedom of speech. I started to issue press releases, and particularly regarding my vision for education, that was the area I had expertise in, so it was logical for me to want to speak to the public and the media regarding that.
And they don't like it, or what?
Well, Mr. Palmer said that my vision for education was not compatible with theirs, but they don't have a policy for education, so he was dishonest about that. And also, I issued press releases about the local community because I'm concerned about the forced amalgamations by Colin Barnett and the Liberal politicians. And also, I issued a press release about my vision to revitalise the port city of Fremantle. So I believe that I was on the right path. Political candidates have to engage the electorate, they have to engage the public, they have to engage the media. I was actually threatened at one point. I was told if I don't toe the party line,
yes,
they're going to cut me off. That's what I was told on the telephone by one of their executives.
They cut you off?
Well, they did cut me off in the end. I was very shocked about it. I was hurt as well,
yes,
and disappointed, and I believe they've made a big mistake. We were actually instructed by email, and I have the emails to prove what I'm saying, to issue 2 press releases a week concerning our electorate. So one of those I issued about education. It was a 3-page one, and they said, well, it can only be 1 page, and that's it. And I said, look, this can't be explained in 1 page. It's taken many years for me to formulate this vision, and it doesn't matter how long it is, 1 page or 3 pages. It's what you say and what you write, and the vision you're articulating and the priorities that you're giving. That's the important aspect.
So you got the conflict with the Palmer Party. They sacked you,
yeah,
and you are not member of the party anymore, and you are now masquerading as Australian Protectionist Party member.
Well, the very same day that happened, I got a phone call from the state chairman, Mr. Bradley Rose of the Australian Protectionist Party, the very same day, and he'd called me before a number of weeks earlier and talked about my candidacy for the Fremantle federal electorate. So we had a conversation before, and he called me the very same day. I got calls from the press as well about what had happened to me, and to give my side of the story, obviously.
And they painted your side of the story?
Not really. The Australian newspaper and the Australian Associated Press printed articles, and I'm a bit concerned about, journalism. I've published 4 books of non-fiction literature, so journalism should be objective and non-partial and non-biased. So I issued my YouTube broadcast. If you YouTube my name, Teresa van Lieshout, you can see the rhetoric I engaged about that. But so I had a call from Mr. Rose, and he said, well, you want to run with us? Straight away on the telephone. And so within 3 days, I was endorsed by the Australian Protectionist Party.
Your new party, the Australian Protectionist Party. What sort of objectives they got for the election?
Well, they have a great website, www.protectionist.net. It's been going for a number of years. It has its foundations in the first decade politicians. The first and second Prime Minister, Edmund Barton and Alfred Deakin, were protectionist politicians. And they were Prime Ministers, so they had a whole lot of other politicians as well, protectionist politicians in the state parliament and the federal parliament in the first decade of federation.
Yes.
They established some very important institutions in Australian society, our constitution. They established the state and federal parliamentary system, and they established the judicial system as well, particularly the High Court.
So they got a great tradition in politics.
Absolutely. The foundation of the Australian Protectionist Party goes back to the first decade of federation from 1901 to 1910, where protectionist politicians dominated the state and federal parliament. So there's a great historical significance and importance to our party. Also, they have the general policies on the website to do with protection of the family, protection of the environment, protection of Australian-owned and way of life, protection of our historical values and culture, protection of Australian-owned and made industries, businesses, organisations and companies. And we're adding one, protection for Australian rights for quality education as well. Also, protection for free speech too. So some of those fundamental values of democracy, freedom of speech, the freedom to assemble in groups and to articulate your views. So those sorts of protections, that is the...
That's part of the Protectionist Party's vision.
That's right.
How can we have problems with free speech in Australia? They say we are a democratic country and we got all the rights for everything. We can protest, we can have free speech, we can have elections, we can have been nominated for any political party or independence. So what's the problem with this system?
I think there are a number of problems with free speech in Australia. There's a famous recent High Court case, Corneloo Brothers, where the Liberal and Labor Attorney Generals around Australia went to the High Court to destroy the rights of the Corneloo Brothers, who were Christian men preaching the New Testament in South Australia. Now, 3 Supreme Court judges in South Australia had ruled in favour of the brothers preaching in public on the basis of implied freedom of speech in the Constitution. Now, the Attorney Generals, Liberal and Labor politicians, went to the High Court, used their position, spent millions of dollars of tax money going to the High Court to destroy their rights. And those judges did destroy their rights. Also, in my case, in the Supreme Court, Liberal Attorney General Michael Mission intervened and tried to destroy my rights to free speech in the West Australian Supreme Court, when at the very same time the Liberal Party, the head of the Supreme Court, Wayne Martin, had given an injunction to the Liberal Party, politicians and candidates, for free political signage throughout the state of Western Australia, and then allowed me to be prosecuted, an independent candidate, for exactly the same matter, for political signage. So they're giving free speech to the people in charge, the Liberal and Labor politicians, and
but not for the independents.
No, not for the independents, and also for the citizen as well. So the citizens' rights to free speech. And a lot of people think that there is an implied freedom of speech in the Australian Constitution, but it's not an explicit right. Australia is the only country in the Western world, the only nation in the Western world that doesn't have a Bill of Rights for its citizens.
That's very true.
And also the right of free political communication is implied in the Constitution. The High Court judges in the 1980s and 1990s, there were a lot of High Court cases where they were trying to promote freedom of speech and create a Bill of Rights for Australians, but the politicians kept blocking it all the time. So Liberal and Labor politicians don't want free speech because it maintains their power and control over society. Exactly the same argument as I provide why they don't want people to be educated, because the more educated you are, the more you are exercising your rights and speaking freely and fighting for justice for issues. And so what it does is it maintains their power and control over society. You know, as long as they're in charge, what it creates is it creates a lot of injustice, like homelessness and suicide and people dying in prisons and psychiatric facilities, and they don't talk about those issues.
And what do you think why Australia is the only Western civilization or country who not have the Bill of Rights for their own citizens?
Well, again, the argument that it maintains their own power and control. And if you have a look at the Constitution, there are implied rights to freedom of speech, but they're not explicit and they're not guaranteed. The Australian Constitution really needs to be developed a lot more. It essentially was a document created in 1901 and preceding that, where it established our parliamentary system and judicial system. Unlike the American Constitution, where they had explicit rights written into their Constitution, Australia doesn't have that. So under our Australian Constitution, the citizens have no rights. The guarantee Even the status of citizenship is not guaranteed in the Australian Constitution. Freedom of speech is not guaranteed. Freedom of religion is not guaranteed. Access to courts is not guaranteed in our Constitution. So these create huge problems.
So what's happening with solicitors who are human rights specialists like Melissa Parkey? Why don't they fight in the Parliament for Bill of Rights for Australians and freedom of speech in the Constitution?
Well, I did a YouTube broadcast exactly on that issue, that she's a human rights lawyer. She's had the seat of Fremantle for over 2 terms, and she's done nothing to promote a Bill of Rights for Australian citizens, which makes her even more guilty. She's focused on international issues, and now she's just been made a new development.
We've got issues in Australia
Exactly.
which are not solved, and no one is talking about it.
Well, I'm one of the very few political candidates who's actually talking about these issues and fighting for the rights of the citizens and the injustice that's been engaged against the people, I've said, with the homelessness and the suicide and people dying in our prisons and psychiatric facilities. So these are huge human rights abuses which have been engaged by the government, really. And Melissa Park is guilty of that as well. She's been in the Fremantle seat for more than 2 terms. She's done nothing to raise these issues. She's said and done nothing to stop it. So therefore, she's not effective. She is ineffective. And at this point in Australia's history, Australia does not need a Minister for International Development for the Fremantle federal electorate. It needs someone like me who will fight for the rights of the citizens and fights for the rights of communities.
On that note, we have to have a short break. But please stay with us, because after the break, we're coming back with more discussion with Teresa and her vision on education.
And broadcast any event.
Luxury support finds Derek backing up on the inside.
A sea of black and white.
To find out how WTV can work for your organisation, call 6365 8869.
Hello and welcome back to One-on-One Shadowboxing. I will continue my discussion with Teresa Lieshout, who is the Australian Protectionist Party candidate for the Fremantle seat for the upcoming election. Teresa, we've been talking about freedom of speech in the previous part of this program. Now, let's go into one or two of the other issues protecting Australian interests. What does it mean?
Protecting our industries, businesses and organisations, Australian owned and made. So that's where we get productive capacity in primary production and secondary production. We need to protect our industries for economic reasons and to create more jobs for Australian citizens.
But Australia has already signed the free trade agreement.
Yeah.
So how can we reverse that?
Well, we can do whatever is in the best interests of the citizens of our nation. My economic vision is for 100% of political funding to go to Australian-owned and made businesses, organisations, industries and companies. So we need to invest in primary production, agriculture, mineral resource production and other primary industries, and then secondary production, manufacturing and small business development, retail trade.
Your Australian Protectionist Party policy is very much like the Palmer Party's policy.
I think some of the policies are a little bit similar. The economic policy is a little bit similar. That's what I was attracted to. Mr. Palmer's party was basically his economic rhetoric, but I don't think it actually goes far enough, to be honest. I think we need taxation reform, which I've articulated for many years, taxation reform. None of the other parties are talking about taxation reform, or very few political candidates are talking about that other than me. So taxation...
What sort of taxation reform you are talking about, Teresa?
Well, Australia has a terrible tax system. It's very convoluted, it's cost ineffective and inefficient. It's very codependent as well. We collect a large amount of taxes from a huge variety of sources, and then we give back in the form of rebates and tax concessions. So it's a codependent tax system. It's very expensive to run and administer as well. And what I want to pursue is tax revenue to be collected through the banking system at a very low transactional tax on deposits and withdrawals. If we collect tax revenue through the banking system, deposits and withdrawals at a very low rate, we can...
But that's what the bank's doing. They're collecting their revenue through the fees of the transactions and the ATM fees and so on and so forth. They're collecting billions and billions of $100 billions. Well,
100 years of profiteering of the banks in Australia is really bad. So what we need to do is greater regulation of the banking system and also collecting tax revenue, which would free up small businesses and all sorts of businesses and industries. They wouldn't have to collect tax revenue on behalf of the government. It could be done at a very low transactional rate. It'll be a much fairer and efficient system and cost-effective system. We could then abolish all other forms of taxation. I would abolish all other forms of taxation except keep the GST, and I would have 100% of GST going back to the state. So in effect, the states would collect their own GST and keep 100% of its GST. We could abolish income tax, we could abolish company tax, we could abolish tax on excise, we could abolish property transfer tax. If we had a transactional banking tax on deposits and withdrawals to neutralise any negative impact on savings and investments, so it would be equal both sides of the ledger at a very low rate, say 1% on individual accounts, 2% on sole trader accounts, 3% on company accounts. Any company that operates in Australia, whether it's Australian owned or made or a foreign company, they would have to pay, every time they write a cheque, they pay 4% tax. Every time they put a deposit in their account, they pay 4% tax. The federal parliament will collect twice as much revenue that way, and they can fund everything: education, health, small business grants. They can fund primary and secondary production, agriculture, mineral production, and secondary production processing of minerals, which is the secondary production process. And I don't believe anything will change unless the voters of Australia start voting, number one, other political parties and other political candidates with better vision for the economy, better vision for education, and better priorities to help the Australian people.
Your view of education is that education needs reform because it's just simply not working. Now, the governments or the federal government recognize that because they commissioned the Gonski report to review education and how it can be made better. And they came to the conclusion, pour money into the education system, and that will teach the kids. Is it true or not? What's happening?
That's not true, and the Gonski proposals are commissioned by David Gonski, who's a businessman, not a teacher, not an educator, and it is not a widespread review, but the conclusion that he came to was that the standards in education have dropped throughout Australia progressively over 10 years, but the report doesn't examine why. Now, I've been in the classroom for 17 years teaching. I've written and published 4 books of non-fiction literature, and I have a Master of Education specialising in leadership management, so I know a lot about what I'm talking about. I do have the expertise and the skill to fix. So
how do you want to fix the education system?
The funding is one aspect. 95% of political funding, federal and state political funding, does not get to the classroom. Teachers don't have budgets. They have budgets, small budgets in primary education, but most political funding is spent on bureaucracy and administration. And for many years, ever since I've been teaching, teachers have always purchased resources out of their own salaries, which is further evidence that the money is not getting to the classroom. So I promote in the strongest possible terms for teacher budgets, and any federal funding for education that I pursue will go directly to the schools, not to the state government, and not just to the school, but to the teachers. So the condition for funding, federal funding, what I will promote, is for all 100% of federal funding to go to the schools on the condition that it goes to the teachers in the form of teacher budgets. So the teachers will have a budget, looking at a budget of about $10,000 a year for a teacher working in the classroom. They can buy resources, they can buy educational equipment and excursions, etc. So without budgets, teachers, it's very difficult for you to do your work.
How about the teachers' rights?
Well, teachers' rights is a very big part of why the education system is failing. Liberal and Labor politicians across the country have destroyed the rights, authority and status of teachers. They've allowed principals to sack teachers across Australia, which has destroyed their rights. They've also allowed teachers to be subject to violence and abuse, horrific violence and abuse in some schools, particularly the government schools, and
so the kids got more protection by the system than the teachers.
That's correct. And even under the legislation now, particularly in Western Australia, the Liberal Labor politicians, it doesn't matter, they're all the same. They're both guilty of it. They have created, with the Teacher Registration Act of 2012, they have given more rights to children than a teacher. You cannot educate effectively that way. It is impossible to educate effectively when children have more rights than a teacher. In effect, the child has the cane in the hand now. So my vision is to give teachers across Australia suspension rights for up to 10 days, where a teacher can suspend a child for violence or verbal abuse or bullying. Because at the moment they are not empowered to even protect children from other children in the classroom from bullying and abuse. I think particularly in the government schools it's worse, because in the private schools they do get more funding, political funding, and they also have more religious education as well, more teaching of morals and values education, which is another aspect of the vision I want to pursue, is to increase the teaching of morals and values in all Australian schools, including the teaching of the New Testament if schools want to pursue it. Children should be able to celebrate Christmas and Easter and have Christmas concerts as we did in the past, and to sing Christmas carols and things like that is related to the historical values and culture of Australia as a nation.
And now they couldn't do that because of political correctness, or why?
Because of political correctness, because the politicians are dictating to the teachers what they can do and can't do, and the principals as well. They use principals as puppets. So I think I want to see level 3 teachers across Australia administer schools, authority for discipline and budgets, and also for for the decision-making processes in the school to be conducted by level 3 teachers, giving the teacher in the classroom more authority, budgets, the ability to discipline and increase the teaching of morals and values education, as well as the other curriculum areas as well. We will create a world-class education system, and it will truly empower teachers to do the very important work that they're called to do.
But as you say, the politicians don't want to have that educated mass on the streets.
Well, they don't want people educated. That's why they've done this to the teachers. They've destroyed the teachers' rights. So that's why more teachers like me need to pursue politics and get into the parliament.
But then the Labour's coming up with the Gonski report and with the billions of dollars offering to schools. Do you think, Teresa, money can teach kids reading and writing and mathematics?
Well, that's what they think, isn't it? That's the problem. That's not true.
But what do you think?
Well, I think that we need to focus on the curriculum, the authority structures in schools as well, the curriculum as well. So my idea is to have a new standardised, in the context of the Australian National Curriculum, standardised English course for Year 11 and 12, standardised English course with a focus on writing skills, 50% of the course focus on writing skills, because everybody knows that children can't read and write anymore, engage mathematics effectively as well. So a 50% focus on writing skills with a Year 11 and 12 English course. Also, a Year 11 and 12 research skills course, where Year 11 and 12 students can focus on research skills and essay writing skills for tertiary education, whether it be university education or TAFE education. And I also believe we need to have something like 80% of tertiary places in universities and TAFE for Australian-born children. Because at the moment, about 50% of Australian children go to university or TAFE. It is disgraceful. It is not good enough, and it needs to be a higher rate of matriculation from Year 12 to tertiary education. And a lot of reasons why they're failing is because politicians have disempowered the teachers to teach reading, writing and mathematics effectively. So 80% of children in Western Australia in year 2012, that's Western Australia, 80% of children who did stage 2 English failed. 80%, that is a disgusting figure.
That should go into the Guinness Books of Records. What are you offering for Fremantle?
Well, they should vote for me because I will be the next Federal Minister for Education in Australia, potentially. I also will fight for local communities and the rights of citizens in the Fremantle Federal Electorate and the communities in the Fremantle Federal Electorate, including the port city of Fremantle, where Colin Barnett is destroying the port city of Fremantle with his forced council amalgamations, and the communities throughout Western Australia. I am the only political candidate willing to fight for the port city of Fremantle and for the communities within the Fremantle Federal Electorate. I also have a great vision to revitalise the port city by fighting for Commonwealth funding to revitalise the international passenger terminal, which is old and run down, so to encourage more international cruise liner ships to come into Fremantle. It will revitalise the port city of Fremantle, a lot more economic development. It'll be a great economic advantage for Fremantle.
Teresa, thank you for coming and good luck for your upcoming election.
Thank you very much.
In Fremantle. Please come back next week, same time, same channel, one-on-one shadow boxing.